masculine and feminine. We touched on it a little bit at the end of last call, but we didn't get into it. So hopefully the suspense is killing you all. And we're going to get into it today more and more. So this is one that I probably started learning about around 10 years ago. So it's quite amazing how, back then it was amazing to me to kind of be learning about this stuff and to see where we are today with it. And it's kind of coming in a little bit more, but it's still, there's still some way to go. So, when we talk about masculine and feminine, what Andrew would you say is the common interpretation for people? Most people listening, what are they probably going to presume in the masculine?
I probably do know the answer to that one. And that's more of it's more of the classic social, traditional, biological definition of a man and a woman. And it's totally not that.
Yeah, exactly. So traditionally, masculine should be the man and feminine should be the woman. And I was reflecting on this today because it's, through the learning of this, it became clear that actually what may be more beneficial to us in this day and age is to have a balance of both the masculine and feminine, because it's available within us. But as human beings, we will be accessing one more than the other. And it's not because of our body parts either. And that's commonly what we go towards. And as I was reflecting on this today, I was thinking, how was it always relevant, and was it always the way that it may be looked at more today, or is it just that we are now updating the way that we look at this because it needs to be updated? It was always there in its form as it was, but we just, as human beings, just kept on with masculine man, feminine woman. I don't know if that makes much sense, but it might do as we go on through talking about it. So to be able to be more in balance about masculine and feminine is firstly to recognize that we have the traits of both the masculine and feminine within us. And maybe we can start off with looking at what traits are. I don't know whether, Andrew, you've got anything on this.
I think that's a good place to start, because I think some of the audience may not know too much about masculine and feminine energy. So, energy and traits, we can kind of use a little bit interchangeably. Let's say feminine energy is more soft, yielding, flowing, ethereal. Masculine energy might be a little bit more structured, hard, piercing, etc., etc. And none of this might make any sense to business owners and leaders at the moment, but it will stick around for a tick. So that's the energetic side of things. And let's say at a basic level, masculine energy might show up in striving for goals. It's very much a striving energy. Whereas the feminine energy might be a little bit more of a nurturing energy. It might be a little bit more around inclusiveness. It might be a little bit more around the emotional world. The masculine might be a little more around logic and rationality. So maybe we start there. That's a really simple definition.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think just as you say that, I would assume that most people could get a sense of a lot of those words as traits that energies that they actually carry, whether they're the masculine ones or the feminine ones, and whether they're a man or a woman listening to this. So I think that's the key thing within this. It's to go, okay, just because I'm a woman, does it mean that I'm only nurturing, and does it mean that I'm only in flow, or do I actually do structure? Do I have goals? And to reflect on it in that way is really important. And what came up there also was, this thing around, rather than it being based on what body parts we own, what body parts we were born with, this stuff is more around the experiences that we had in childhood that led us to create our personality in more of the masculine or the feminine, regardless of the gender of us. So the potential is that as a woman, we grew up in a environment which was quite masculine. So our mum was quite in her masculine. She liked order. She liked structure. She, maybe was quite judgmental, quite a strong woman. Your dad may have been more feminine. He could have been masculine as well. But anyway, whatever you're watching, you're choosing what you want.
that's true here.
Yeah.
That's true here. So my mum's more masculine and my dad's more feminine, and people might find that to be a little strange, but yeah, that's definitely the case for my.
Yeah, exactly. And it's common. I see that, I see that a lot with a lot of I think that's the thing is to see the generalizations we make. But once we start to actually pick into things and go, actually, if you look at our own situations or we look at the situations of the people around us, our friends in their relationships, what does play out in their relationships? Is the man more the masculine, or actually is it the woman that wears the trousers, as we say? So we generalize it of how it should be. But what we do throughout those generalizations is we miss out on what's actually happening in the direct world around us, which makes us have expectations that men should be in their masculine and women should be in their feminine. So, yeah.
I want to pick up on a couple of things before we go down that line a little bit further. I think what you're talking about just in terms of like the historical aspects of it, I think everyone's very aware of the gender debate, and equality and inclusivity and to a certain extent, diversity as well. We're less aware of the diversity and inclusiveness of the energy itself. And so I'm really curious. We've had this big push over the last 50 or 60 years really into gender equality, which is really cool. I mean, it's necessary for society to function at a higher level. And I'm really curious to see whether the energetic component of that catches up. And I do think it is. I actually think in a certain sense, this societal phenomena of men seeming to lose their identity, I actually think it's a big recasting of masculine and feminine energy in men. And I also think the flip paradox is happening with women. There's a lot more masculine energy coming into gender-typed women. So I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the boss bitches. And I think as well, the judgment that comes up around feminine men and masculine women. So there is this whole, as you say, it's like this whole rethinking, what's actually more important these days, rather than to try and fit something that classically should have been a certain way and probably was pushed to be a certain way because it was more needed to be, into kind of seeing that we've hit the roof of that and it's not quite working. So now we are seeing the relevance of, women leaning more into that masculine and giving self permission to do that, and men allowing themselves to lean more into that feminine as well. But the permission
totally.
part,
I mean, the whole process. I mean, the whole process of, let's say, setting boundaries, which has become a huge phenomena in the West over the last 30 or so years. Setting boundaries is a masculine energy, just for people to reference. Being more open and receptive is a more feminine energy, just as a little example. And I got a question for you that may help the audience if they're a little bit stumped with this concept. I'm curious to know, do you think that this video cast, do you think we're more masculine or feminine?
What do you mean? Why don't you answer that?
Just this. Well, I'm going to invite the audience to reflect on, we often don't come to this with much structure. We'll have one idea, and we'll talk about it during the week for perhaps 3 or 4 seconds, and we'll say this week it's masculine and feminine. And that's about the extent of our planning. We don't really have a goal here other than to hopefully educate and inspire people on the platform. But we don't really have too much structure. We don't have too many goals with this. It's kind of an organic ebb and flow. We don't know where we're going to go. So I would suggest that this, dialectic is very feminine for the most part.
Yeah. And I would say that there's more of a need from you to have a bit more structure in it, in the masculine, and for me to be a bit more flowy in the feminine. So we're really going to go into it.
Let's just air out our laundry here.
I think it is interesting, to ask people, because again, we're going to hear, if people choose to reply to that, is we're going to hear perspectives. So some may seem more masculine and some may seem more feminine. So again, it's there is no right or wrong necessarily in this. It's again, it's the perspectives, and I'll often see people that are more in their masculine will be more, we'll see people more in their feminine because they're quite masculine. And they may type someone as more feminine because they're more feminine than them, but then someone more feminine may type that same person as more masculine. So again, this is very perspective based. But I think, the beauty of this stuff is to be able to, if you want to, is to be able to assess for yourself what's happened for you in your past, for you to have chosen what you believe you sit more in, because that's the most important thing. If you have seen yourself grow up in an environment where, as a woman, you were raised by very strong women, and it's meant that you're very independent and, very goal striving, and you are, maybe not healthily too much in the masculine, then for yourself, that might be a great thing to explore how you came to be that way, and what changes you may want to make for yourself. And someone may say to you, oh, no, but you're really feminine. But for you, it's not comfortable because there is a sense that there's a lot of masculine going on there. So it's a lot of this stuff it's good to have other people's opinions and get help, get a coach, whatever you need to do, read some stuff, but also to trust within yourself that, if you want change, then that's, for you to choose that rather than other people to tell you it. So.
Yeah, 100%. Should we talk a little bit about how you might notice it in yourself, the different energies? Like maybe let's talk about when it gets a little bit out of balance. So, if I can offer a starting point, if we get a little bit out of balance in the masculine, there tends to be too much striving, too much action, too much structure, too much goal orientation, and we end up feeling burnt out. We might come across as being someone who has a lack of empathy, and we might struggle with connection in relationships. And so that's kind of, let's say, some symptoms of hypermasculinity. And then on the other side of it, hyperfemininity, there's an absence of structure. There's an absence of order, and things won't get done. If there's hyperfemininity, there'll be a lot of talk about feelings and inclusivity and how everyone is in their state, but there'll be not much talk about the tangible realities, let's say, in your team or in your business. And so this is why it's so important to have the balance. You kind of can't have...
imagine all of those together. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In a leader, that's kind of the perfection of a human being, or let's say, in this case, if we're talking leadership, it's, whereas traditionally leaders, CEOs, it's, the masculine traits have definitely been preferenced. As time has gone on, we've obviously seen that, empathy might be helpful, asking people how they are and actually genuinely caring might be beneficial. And so over time, and I refer back to COVID days, lockdown, I really saw a shift in that, that recognition from corporates. When I look at my experiences prior to COVID, going into corporates, the things that we used to talk about versus the things that get talked about now, there has been a big shift, and there is a lot more. I'm sure people, know this for themselves within their workplace, that there is a lot more going on for most companies in terms of offering their staff training in certain things, more on the soft skills rather than, the harder stuff. So yeah, I think we hit the roof at some stage of the realization that something else, a level of care for staff would be really, really useful. And so now there's this whole thing that can get said now that we're going too far the other way.
Yeah, totally. And that's actually necessary as well, isn't it? One of the things we talk about is you've got to go a little bit too far the other way before you can come back and find your balance. I'm going to give maybe a little contrast frame. One of the things that I've been curious about lately is, I totally agree with you on the soft skills and corporate attitudes are changing. But largely, if I look at, let's say, advertising on some of the social media platforms, what's almost required or demanded by the market is still a very masculine orientation. And it's like, when you're trying to call out a person who you want to speak to, we're all still trained to call it out rather bluntly and to call it out with a results orientation. So it's still very masculine.
Can you give an example of
Yeah.
that?
So it's like, if I wanted to advertise what we might do in terms of leadership facilitation, really to get traction, there is a demand for, well, what's the actual tangible result? How much money am I going to make? How much money am I going to save? Am I going to improve my productivity by X%? Am I going to, it's still we're still very objective, very hard numbers, very facts based in the space of advertising. And it's an interesting one that it's fascinating to me because we all know that people buy on emotions. Yet there's still this very masculine narrative that runs over the top of it that's required to get to the feminine, if that makes sense. At least that's my experience running Facebook
And I
ads
think
and stuff.
it's true in the world that you talk about with the advertising, the marketing, because the majority of people, within our sphere are striving for success, for identity through what they do, through money, through, safety and security, needs and concerns and worries, versus the small numbers that aren't advertising in that traditional way, and maybe aren't making tons of money, but have enough to be doing the work that they love doing with the smaller numbers of people that aren't actually there for the striving either. And I think that's it. And this is, we can talk about this so much, it's talked about so much, but we're still not really getting it, as a generalization. We can sit there and go, yeah, I understand that it's not about money. It's not about, the things I buy or the house I live in or the car or all of that. We kind of are starting to get this, but we're not really getting it because we're still going for it. We're kind of still trying to convince ourselves of the truth of, the value of us as a human being versus all the stuff that we need. But actually the embodiment of that is we're still living in a world of high striving. So we have to market if that's what we want to do to the people that want what we want in theory in that hard world. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So I think, this balancing in your own personal life and in the business, like it's helpful to first of all just get a sense of, what's the balance of your own masculine, feminine energy. And then also just reflect for the individuals in your team, what might be theirs that you can observe and that you can share and dialogue together on. And it's a really helpful frame for performance and well-being in the team. Of course, performance being masculine, well-being being feminine. And you want both, want one or the other. And then also, I think the dynamics of the team is another thing to pay attention to. Are the dynamics more feminine or masculine? So not even just at the individual level of individual people that have biologies and also have these energetic traits. Like what's the nature of the dynamic, the relationships, the interactions? Like relationships would typically be a more feminine energy, but often you'll find in corporates that the relationships are quite brutal. They're quite masculine relationships. They're relationships that are oriented around getting tasks done.
So it's I guess it's the type of relationship rather than just relationship. So the relating aspect of it. How are we relating? Are we relating in a feminine or a masculine way? So
yeah, totally.
And as leaders, that's what we are. As whoever, it's once you are aware of this stuff and you yourself are fairly in balance, you will then be able to pick and choose the way that you relate with people, and it will be different. If you're relating with someone who is more in their feminine, regardless of their gender, then maybe you're going to match that. You're not going to be as harsh as you might be with someone who's more in their masculine that may enjoy that harshness, but they don't always. Sometimes you get harsh against harsh and they're actually very sensitive on the inside. There's a big feminine part on the inside that is just being masked and hidden. And so you get the clash of the masculine on behalf of not, giving self permission to allow that feminine to come through. And this is why the world is where we are when we see the world wars and all the rest of it. Yeah, it's the clash it's a clash of shadow. So it's the shadow aspect is of suppressing the feminine within self and only allowing that masculine to show up. And then you're in the face of someone who is exactly like you. So it's like, battlefields. So to
I
be
mean,
able
a few
to,
years ago,
yeah,
you know, if you had to give me $1 for every time I was called a hard ass, I'd be loaded. And it's actually just not true. You know, that's the surface of it. And underneath is like, I don't know what the word to describe it is, perhaps custard.
did you enjoy being called a hard ass?
There was a part of me that enjoyed it, and there was a part of me that despised it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a
But,
big
you
one.
know, actually, we were talking about this a few months ago. I had to go through a phase of you know, let's say 4 or 5 years of completely going way into the feminine to get anywhere near back to balance.
Yeah.
You know, and I probably went a little bit too far that way, and now it's a little better. But when we're under stress, you know, we tend to go back to our childhood roots, whether that's more masculine or more feminine. So it's a really interesting combo, this one. I'd love to know, like, you've done a lot of work with this one, and I'd love to know how you might look at conflict resolution, let's say, or conflict in teams using masculine and feminine dynamics. What comes to mind for you on
I
that?
mean, so from a professional perspective of myself, obviously, if I was going in, then that would be to a company, then that's what I would be looking for is, you know, what's showing up in each individual. In terms of, you know, any advice for people, again, it's going back to recognizing within yourself what you preference more of. And then if you are in conflict with others, then it's, you know, noticing what are they doing more of. If we're not able to relate and we're in conflict with someone, there's something going on here that, you know, we've lost rapport with that person. So if it is someone more in their feminine and we're in our masculine, might we be triggered by them in their feminine because it's something that we may not give ourselves permission to be. So this work is really all around conflict resolution, starts within, with self first, right? So it's a recognition of self to be able to be clear enough to go into a situation with someone that you weren't on great terms with before and come at it from a different, you know, a different angle, from a different perspective. So again, communication, you know, that feminine, you know, that feminine trait of, you know, connecting with the person, communicating, understanding. And then,
Yeah,
you know, once that's done, you know, leaning then potentially more into that masculine of what do we do from here? What do we want to achieve from this? What goals do we want to set moving forward in terms of our relating? So it's bringing, you know, bringing them both to, to the dynamic.
yeah.
And I think it's go on.
I'd love to add a couple of things if that's okay.
Sure.
So I think that like the masculine energy in conflict might be assertion, and the feminine energy, it might actually be suppression. And it's what's really interesting with the feminine energy is that there'll be a suppression, but then all of a sudden there'll be a giant expression. And, you know, I don't mean to, this has got nothing to do with gender. I just want to restate that. It's the energy. You can have males who are more in their feminine that will really suppress for a long time, then express very abruptly sometimes. And so this is the kind of energy that goes on in a conflict situation. And if someone's sitting in their feminine, you know, to step into the masculine, they might look to set boundaries at a certain stage of their psychological maturity. And so that's a big phenomenon that we're seeing a lot of at the moment in society. And that can be helpful in preserving the integrity of the individual and defining the characteristics of the relationship. And then at a certain point, boundaries actually separate us and they're not
Sure.
particularly helpful.
Because they're on
And
behalf of
so
control, another
they're on
masculine
behalf of
trait.
control.
Yeah. I need
Yeah.
this to be
And
this
so,
way so that I feel okay.
yeah, totally. And
Yeah.
so that's not healthy either. So, you know, it's really interesting when we go into corporates, it's like, yeah, boundaries have their place. And there's a time and a place for them. A better way would be to be open to each other, be respectful of each other as independent human beings who have their own beliefs, perspectives, et cetera, and make agreements rather than set boundaries. And so the making of an agreement, you know, is probably more of a feminine energy. but there's a mutuality in it. And agreements are much nicer than boundaries in the long term. So, I just kind of wanted to share that. Some people will avoid conflict because perhaps they don't have enough masculine energy inside to face it. And so, hopefully some of these markers might help you, look at the way you are, the balance of your masculine and feminine energy, and even in the team. How is conflict in the team?
Yeah, and I think what I'd add to that as well is it's, the boundaries, once we've exhausted that, because it's relevant until it's not anymore. See this a lot with clients. They want boundaries and then it's like, yeah, go away and do what you need to do. And then they come back and they're annoyed because their boundaries haven't been met. And, they've probably violated their own boundaries a lot of the time as well, because it's in a controlling way. So what we can also, when we get to a point of this is move to a place of trust. So it's rather than needing boundaries, but I need you to be like this, on every time I meet you from now, it then becomes, I trust that in the next moment something arises, we will be able to communicate, agree, or whatever we want to call it in each moment. What needs to happen, we just keep communicating. Because what we do with the boundaries is we set a boundary in a moment in time, and then a year down the line, we're still talking about this old thing that isn't the potential of us. It's a very restricted version of us. I've told myself I shouldn't do that. I set a boundary that I shouldn't do that. And now I'm a year later and I'm still held to my boundary, but I've grown way past that because I don't trust myself in every moment to be able to make a decision or to be able to have a communication with someone and for it to be okay. So it's, there's a variety of options here and boundaries if that's where you're at. And I think that's where a lot of people, humanity is in movement towards that stage of bound. We hear this word a lot now, and that's where most people are at. The next level of this, the majority will be talking something different when the time is right. So all of these phenomena have a place and a time and a place. And
100%.
Yeah.
Maybe just to tie it together, let's explore the listening and masculine and feminine, because I guess that's where we introduced it. I was thinking about this the other day, and I haven't seen this a lot recently in my coaching. But there's a couple of clients that we're talking about this kind of stuff, and I used to talk about this a lot. But when we're listening, if we're not listening from our own perspective, and we're not listening from our filters, and we're at least in that genuine empathetic listening, or even the sacred listening that we mentioned last time, we're listening for whether someone wants a problem to be solved or whether they want a landing place for their emotions. And they're two different things. And I see people miss each other in conversation all the time because they're not sure what the other person actually wants. And they mightn't be sure what they even want out of the communication. But, a really interesting thing is to get to know the dynamic in your most prominent relationships as to, whether the person really is looking for support or a solution as a general rule of thumb. And ask each other, what do you need right now? How can I help you right now? There's a whole other discussion that we probably should have at some point on the shadow and projection and all that stuff, but that's too much for this particular session. But yeah, I thought I'd just open that up. Do you have any thoughts on listening and masculine, feminine?
Yeah, I mean, that's the best thing to do. It's, if you're having a conversation with someone, have that conversation being clear on firstly what you want from it, and maybe from the listener for them to be clear. So, at some point someone can take responsibility for, would you like advice or would you like me just to listen? Or someone else framing up, I really want to tell you this. I don't, I do this a lot. I don't need you to say anything. I just need a place to just, I have a lot of those sorts of relationships where it's just like, nothing needed. It's like journaling or something. It's just to get it out. So yeah, really importantly, it's just communicating, checking in, and then noticing for yourself if you are someone that is more, I need to get this fixed. It's like an impatience thing, or I'd feel like a really bad person if I didn't give a solution. And just watching that, if that is you, that's the masculine, the fixer, the protector. And then the feminine part is the one, again, these are without check-ins, the one that simply listens, and maybe someone does want some advice, but they're just listening. And again, and I think now people will often say to me now, can you just tell me what you think, or give me your advice about this? And for me now, it's a listening, and it's a, well, what do you want to do? And they'll be like, shut up, I need to stop doing your coaching rubbish. And for me, it's like there is no, I don't have your answer, which people don't like. And then we might, and they're like, well, just tell me something. And I'm like, okay, well, this is what I would do, but I'm not suggesting that you do this. And a lot of the time people would hear what I would do and they wouldn't do it, because it is, at this point, it's through a lot of years of work. There's not a need to blame anyone for anything or tell them about themselves. It's more us taking self-responsibility. So when I offer that as advice, if that's what people want, it's often rejected. That's why I don't go in with the advice, because, unless someone's, paying to be coached, friends don't really want to hear what I have to say. It's quite irritating. So, yeah. But it's very freeing for me, because I used to be the one that, wanted to give the advice and, all the rest of it. Now it's just like, well, you've got your own answers. What do you think? This is what I would do.
I think I'm going to leave that one there. I'll share, just before we go, I'll share a little bit about Joe and I and my relationship on that one, and flipping between the masculine and feminine in a healthy way. Joe gets a little bit anxious about technology, and in particular,
security. Do you want to say who Joe is?
Oh, yes, she's my wife.
Yeah.
Yeah, of 15 years. At least I think it's 15 years. Don't quote me on that. If she gets into, with technology, she can be quite anxious, particularly like the security and privacy aspect of technology. And so probably once a week, there'll be some sort of technology glitch in her world, and there'll be stress that comes up, and she'll come to me as being the, apparent resident tech expert, even though I think Ollie, our son, who's 11, probably knows more about tech now than I do. Yeah. And in those moments, it's better to just solve it. She just wants me to solve it. It's like, can you just solve this for me? And I'm like, okay, cool. But if we're sitting on the couch, and there's something coming up about, other aspects of life, whether it's the school, or whether it's what we're doing for the day, or, what her state of mind is, typically she just wants support. She just wants someone to listen and reflect back and build on the conversation, but not necessarily solve the problems that are hers, So, that's something that happens in our relationship, which is quite amusing, quite fun.
Yeah. I think something that comes up a lot as well is this generalized assumption that the majority, from what I hear, will think is that women are people pleasers, as if men aren't. And I think that's quite a key one. People pleasing is a feminine trait, and people pleasing is something that a lot of men do. So to any people out there that assume it's just women that people please, I can assure you that isn't the case. And I think this is the thing. Once we can start to realize this stuff, we can start to view each other differently. I've run a number of workshops in the past on this very subject. And women have literally gone to the end of the workshop and gone, I didn't realize that men thought like me, as there's been openings in the session, and, men being vulnerable about their own insecurities. And, we have this thing, so it actually comes up a lot in the workplace, and this isn't to, cast any judgment, but there's, the sort of the wounded females, and the men, the boys club, and we talk about all this sort of stuff. And I think there's a lot of separation that occurs through these sorts of conversations, when actually, when you get into some of these conversations with these men that appear overly confident, that overconfidence is on behalf of actual insecurity, imposter syndrome, and a lot more that's going on. And that's not to say that anyone should know that, because you're not trained in this stuff, but to know from, experts that what you're seeing in the workplace a lot of the time with these men in these high-powered positions, thinking that you're some sort of lesser because you're a woman, all of your insecurities will be playing out. They'll just be playing out in overconfidence or underconfidence in a way. So I always like to put that out there, that there'll be a lot more going on for the ones that seem overconfident than we may be led to believe. So always, good to note that.
I
I know that
just like, not to make any controversial statements or anything, but in a certain sense, we're all already equal. Due to the fact that we're all subject to the human condition, and there's not a person that can escape their own, traumatic experiences. And when we talk about trauma, I just want to, maybe soften it a little bit, because it's not what a lot of people think it is. People often associate trauma with these big catastrophic events. It's not. We're having micro traumas all the time, or we're having patterns of adapting to our environment to survive and thrive. And so they're pretty interchangeable, actually. And so everyone grows up. Actually, I was listening to James Hollis just yesterday, and he put it beautifully. We all have the same entry into life. We all have the same exit from life. And it's quite violent and shocking, whichever way you cut it. And so being thrust into the universe as a separate self, we develop these traits, some of them masculine, some of them feminine. We find our way. And then here we are, we're 40, 50 years old, and we're still playing those out. And, kind of the hope here is that, all humans have that conditioning to a certain extent until it can be worked through and understood. And, the hope here for me, I think, is that the next leg of the conversation goes more towards a balancing of the masculine, feminine energy, which can be an integration point for some of the discussions that we're having in society today around diversity, equality, inclusion, gender, how to balance those aspects with performance, meritocracy, In a certain sense, if we had an integration of the masculine and feminine, that would all be taken care of. And so that's
and I think to add to that before we wrap up is a lot of people can think that the answer is to have more women in power. And I think this is where it gets tricky, because I think at the moment, the underdog seems like the perfect solution to the problem. But actually, someone sent me something the other day, a girlfriend sending something about, imagine if this was a boardroom full of women. And my reply was, I know plenty of women in groups that have big bitching fallout. So I think there's this thing that the underdog, the minute that women start to take over, let's say, then the underdog will become the men, and then they'll be in favor again. So I think this isn't about replacing one with the other or trying to bring someone up, because whilst trying to bring one set up, you're going to bring someone down. It's, again, we want equality. So equality is actually seeing the equalness of us all, as you say, being brought into the world in the same way, having certain experiences, regardless of gender and on whichever level, but it doesn't matter. So I think this isn't about further separating us and replacing women with men. It's more about recognizing, if we're to recognize the worth of women, and help them to, get into roles and become more powerful, let's also help the men to tap more into their emotions, for example. And because it does feel quite a lot at the moment that there is a bit of a thing of the man being woman, the woman needs to be supported as if the man doesn't. So I think there's we all
need a little bit of help. Yeah, it's like genuine inclusivity is when we all help each other.
Yeah.
Just to put a little catchphrase out there. So yeah, it's just a fascinating topic. Thanks for leading us in and the conversation. It's really cool.
Yeah, I think there's probably more to be had on this one, but let's see how we go for next week.
I'm tapped out.
All right, thanks everyone for joining, and we'd love to hear from you. Big topic, so feel free to comment, DM us if you're too feminine to put it in the